All right, welcome everybody. It's my absolute pleasure to have this NSF career Q&A for a second time this year after we did it the first time last year. The idea is very simple. We have 4 current awardees, in fact, recent awardees. They received the awards this year. And the theme overall is sort of bio-mechanics, and we do this on Carlos' behalf, who's really a mechanician. But I thought it would be nice to have an expert in moms, because about half of you, no, a quarter of you indicated that you're interested in moms, while about half said BMMB and another quarter about biomaterials. But with that being said, the format is very open. I prepared some questions that I shared with the panelists in case we run out of questions, and we're going to sort of follow that. But I would suggest we just simply start with an introduction of the panelists and then have an open discussion with you. Please feel free to ask your questions directly or through the chat. Yeah, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. And I'll maybe just have Maria introduce herself, and then she'll tab one of the other panelists.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Maria Holland. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Notre Dame. I'm in an aerospace and mechanical engineering department in a bioengineering program, and I do computational biomechanics of growth and development of soft tissues, basically. Yeah, so I got my career started a couple weeks ago from BMMB. So Sapun is to my right.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'm Sapun. I'm an assistant professor here in BME at UT Austin, so in the same, I guess, affiliation with Manuel, but he's in a separate department. My career is from BMAT. It is not on mechanics of materials in per se, because it's on a different part of what my lab works on. But it started, I guess, I'm not really sure how this works. I received a notice of it at some point in, I guess, late January or so, or mid-January, but the start date officially is July 1st. So I don't actually know if the money transferred, but the award somehow exists. I guess to my right, who hasn't gone, would be Darryl.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Darryl Turkishan. I am a professor, assistant professor at Florida International University in the Department of Mechanical and Materials Engineering. My work centers around really understanding biophysical cues and their effects on cells of complex tissues. And the focus of my career is specifically cardiomyocytes and cardiac tissue engineering. My career will start on June 1st. It was awarded back in February, and really excited to share the experiences of writing and fortunately winning the award. And I do want to mention that last year, about this time, I started in the position of many of you, and this conversation helped to convince me that I could apply for the career and, make something that was reasonable. So hopefully that happens for several of you here and you go on to win the award. And I'll turn it over to Carlos.
Thank you, Darryl. Hi, everyone. I'm Carlos Portela, and I'm an assistant professor at MIT McKee. My lab generally works on the mechanics of architected materials, and we do so with computational tools, but also experimentally, starting at the nanoscale and also sometimes at the centimeter scale. So as Manuel said, we got the award through MOMS, and the focus of that career award is to understand the mechanics of self-architected materials. So these are materials that we don't have to 3D print, but rather they assemble in nice patterns, and we want to understand how these patterns lead to some mechanical response. And yeah, this happened, I guess it officially started in February this year.
Congratulations again to y'all. That's obviously a great relief, I think, to many. At least to me, it really was. Just like any other grant is, but a little in addition. I thought as a first good opener, and I think Darryl kind of already alluded to that, I was worried at the time, is this a good time for me to submit my career? And you may be asking yourself this question as the attendee. So maybe Maria, we start with you. Being to my left, I don't know, it's a good rationale. What made you feel like it was a good time? Why not a year prior or a year after?
So I did apply a year prior and was unsuccessful. So I did win it on my second try. I don't know about everybody else. I'm yeah, counting is weird, but so I'm in about my 5th year of the tenure clock. You know, things have been weird with COVID, and I also had a baby, so not like I'm not up for tenure right now, but so I tried, I guess, yeah, a couple summers in, right? And I don't know, I had considered applying a year before, so 2 years before actually I applied for a CRII grant and won it. So this is the SIZE directorate, so Computer Information Science and Engineering, that directorate's Young Investigator sort of pre-career award. And so I applied for that basically my first summer as faculty and got it. And it's a 2-year award. And so then the next year I was like, well, I feel like I should show that I've done something with this before applying for more money. So I waited another year, and then I think I tried that like, so 2 years later, and then got good feedback and reworked a bit and applied again. So that was sort of my rationale. It was sort of relative and based on other grants and opportunities I had.
Any panelists want to add something to that? Was their rationale somehow different?
Particularly, I would say for my, I applied in the first year that I was here, and then I also didn't get it. And then I got some feedback, and actually I was not going to apply in the second time because I was, you know, it was kind of the middle of the summer there, and kids running around, you know, life was happening. And so I think that was difficult to try to find the time, but then I just kind of forced it. And I actually talked to a friend of mine who is senior to me at Michigan, and he kind of gave me some advice, which I thought was useful, which is like, you only get 3 times. So there's 3 times you can sort of, you know, ruin your summer with this grant. So just get it out of the way if you want, right? And so I was like, all right, I'm just going to go for the second time and see what happens. And, you know, I got lucky. So I wouldn't say that's a great way to do it, but I think it was, I mean, in a sense, like, I mean, probably all of us here, it does change your summer plans to not have to worry about this. It's not insignificant, you know?
Right, so I applied at the end of my second year. I specifically did not apply after my first year because I didn't feel like I was ready, and in a few different ways. One, I didn't feel like I was ready as an investigator to sit down and fully form what I thought my career would look like. And in part because I felt like I needed to understand the institution a little bit better to be able to really craft what does my career as a researcher and what does my career as an educator look like at this institution. You know, I had my own vision, but there's a lot of exploration that I think I needed to do. And that helped me be able to craft the proposal so that it was tailored towards the things that would work for me here at FIU.
I'll jump in. So in my case, I got extremely lucky. Fortunately, it happened on the first try, but that's, you know, again, I think a lot of luck went into that. The main thing that kind of made me go for it was, and this comes from advice from colleagues as well, was feeling like I had the right idea or something that I was very passionate about that aligned well with my lab, as Darryl just said. And, you know, I felt like I had that idea. It took a lot of work, and it definitely does, as Sapun was saying, it does take your whole summer to really craft this idea. But yeah, that's kind of the one thing that I had to consider before trying for it.
I also have one, I'll just make one comment, which is a total opinion, if I don't have any facts to back this up. But I think, you know, in Carlos's case, I think, you know, winning after the first try, it's not so common, to be honest, because you get 3 tries to go. At least that's what the PO from the BMAT told me when I did not get it the first time. And I really do think, and I have no proof to back this up, but I believe there is a matrix that they run, that those POs run, which is like, how many times have you applied and how good is your score? And they're hitting something in there to make sure everybody kind of gets you know, the chances, I believe, go up with a good proposal the number of times you apply. Because, you know, if you're on the 3rd round, you can't apply again, and they're cognizant of that. And he told me so much, and he didn't say that such a space exists, but he said in no uncertain terms, a lot of our awardees are 2nd and 3rd years because, you know, they've been experienced more, time is kind of the essence for them.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I also got it on the 2nd try. So if you're considering submitting, also feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to share our specific recommendation if you ask us, right? We're not going to extend an unsolicited recommendation, but if you were to want our opinions, I'm sure we are all open to providing our feedback. I think one of the big questions, and they were also asked in the form, is always how does the career differ from an unsolicited NSF? And I don't know about y'all, but many people get an NSF an unsolicited NSF before they get the career. And then the question is, how different should the career be? And what are the most significant differences that you see? And maybe we start with Darryl just randomly. In short, what are the big differences, if any?
Yeah, so I think it's a significantly different proposal. And so I was a co-PI on another proposal prior to our receiving career, or writing and receiving career. I think there are a few high-level things that are important. One, it's an award. So it's not a grant, it's an award. And so it's an award for you. And so there's a portion of this that telling specifically your story, even more so than you would do in an unsolicited grant, to be able to say that this is how this award will advance your career, both as a researcher and as an educator. And those two elements are important to be able to bring out, what does your vision for your research look like? And how does this award help you to be able to reach that vision? And how does that integrate with your vision as an educator? And being able to pull that into the proposal. And so there's a significant portion of this that is education, and that's beyond the standard sort of broader impacts stuff that you put into an NSF proposal. There's an education plan that needs to be developed. And I'd say that you want to spend a lot of time thinking about what that education plan looks like. A lot of time thinking about what evidence basis do you have for putting forth this education plan? What are the objectives around it? How do you assess it? And how does that tightly integrate with the research? And one of the things I tried to think about was not only how does the research feed into the education, but how does the education feed back in the research so that there is true integration between the two? And there must be a section in there that is integration, because that's one of the solicitation specific criteria, is that there is integration there.
Anything that people feel, especially Ritu has a question. Maybe we'll start with that.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for taking the time to share your experiences. I guess one thing that I'm questioning is, I am going to apply this summer because at MIT, we pretty much just have our first 3 years to do it. Curious about the timeline of, when you reached out to a program officer and kind of how you spread out that time, and also curious to learn a little bit more about how much preliminary data you have, because my experience is more with the NIH, and I don't know what the NSF is like and what they're looking for there.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. So I reached out to the program officer probably May-ish or so, around May, mid to May or late April. And they do make time for you for that. And I think that's something that anybody who's thinking of applying to a program, you definitely should do. So I sent them like the 1-page thing, like equivalent of what an Ames page you would send to NIH, except the NSF version of that. So I sent them that, and then they, at that time, well, now probably they made a Zoom call. So we had a Zoom call together, and then, the guy spent 45 minutes, talking about things with me. And you could ask a lot of the questions that, what do you expect from broader impacts? How does that work in this panel? And they can kind of tell you what they believe, based on their experience running that panel. Presumably they've done it before. And for preliminary data, I kind of asked that as well. I had a decent amount, but I basically told them there are some figures I don't have. I'm going to draw schematics of what I think I will get for these experiments. And I don't know what it's going to look like. And I did exactly that. I took it into, PowerPoint and drew a fake graph, and I said it in the caption, like, this is expected data. And I think people didn't comment on that negatively in the reviews. They commented other things negatively, definitely not that. So I don't think it hurt that much, because I had feasibility data, but I didn't know what to expect from the experiments that I was proposing. I made it clear that I could do those experiments and I will get something, but I do not know what that something is. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I had some decent preliminary data, but especially in my case, I was sort of proposing to develop a new method and then apply it to 2 different questions. I'm here speaking of my successful career proposal, not my unsuccessful one. And so there's sort of some dependency with there, which can be a really tricky thing to pull off, I think. And so I had reasonably good preliminary data for that first aim to say, you know, we're going to make this better, but if we even have to eke by with this, it would probably be okay. And in response to the question in the chat, my preliminary data was not published. Oh, and the other thing I'll say about preliminary data that also sort of gets to what I think Darryl was starting to say about, or what had started to say about what makes the career different. So I took the educational proposal part very seriously, and probably you'll find that among most awardees. I had preliminary data for my educational proposal as well. So it's a project that I do in my class, and I had data from student evaluations before and after the class. And I had, so we developed a website where you can learn cool stories about biomechanics. You should check it out, Biomechanics in the Wild. And we had I had data on page views and topics covered and things like that. So I think when you're thinking about the preliminary data, think about both aspects of the proposal.
I want to just jump in really quickly. By May timeframe, please make sure you reach out to the program directors that you think you're interested in applying to and have a conversation with them, and be persistent about reaching out to them, because they'll be inundated and probably are getting inundated at this time about career. You need to talk to them just so that you get some clarity from them and they know what your concerns are. And as far as the preliminary data, I had very, very little because it was COVID and setting up a lab at the time. There was just not a lot that I could produce. But with NSF, the term that they use is preliminary evidence. And so I had a lot of evidence from, about the techniques that I could use in my lab, a lot of evidence from the literature to be able to say that these are things that could possibly work. And so there was a lot of the narrative was written around, this is the evidence that I have that says that this could possibly work. So you should then trust me to be able to carry out the experiments.
Yeah, the only thing I'll kind of highlight again is make sure to talk to, if you're trying to decide, for instance, which program you're going for, definitely have a chat early, because in my scenario, that might mean that you need to kind of reframe the proposal a little bit. So you want to have that nailed down as soon as possible. I think I reached out around end of March and I had the Zoom chat early April. Which helped a lot to make sure that I was going for that program. And in terms of preliminary data, I had some, and I will say, it was data that potentially there wasn't a clear explanation as to why it was happening, but it was sufficient evidence to show that it could be done. So just keep that in mind. It doesn't have to be necessarily a figure, a graph that's ready for publication, because that's not what they're looking for, I think.
Yeah, I think the standard is quite different for those who have applied to NIH if you're going for an R01 versus going for a career. The standard of preliminary data is different, for sure. The other thing I would say about the reaching out, which echoes everybody's saying here, particularly with respect to what the broader impacts or your educational component should be, I mean, just ask that particular program officer for that program. It is going to vary if you're going to MCB, right? For which, if you're interested in the money, you can go get $1 million from MCB if you're career reward. If you're like us and you're in a BMAT or BMMB program, you're looking at something on the order of 500 to 600, right? So there's a difference there monetarily, depending on what you want to do and what makes sense for you. But usually the program officer can tell you what they're expecting for the broader impacts, and if they can glean that from your one pager, they can be like, that's just weak, or they can say that looks good, and then at least you have some idea of where you're on the right track or not.
I think all of you have alluded already to sort of good and maybe not so good things you've done, and obviously worked still out. But if you had to distill, your new gained wisdom into one piece of advice that you have either received or after you made the mistake want to give moving forward, in short, what would be the one mistake or the one piece of wisdom that you can share about the career now that you're successful awardees? And please, everybody, be aware there's of course a survival bias here.
So I can jump in and maybe I'll be a bit specific to the feedback that I got from moms, which was, I guess, and as we were describing, when you have the Zoom call, you will have a one-pager, and that one-pager should summarize everything you're going to write in 15 pages. So it's an opportunity for them to kind of tell you, okay, this idea won't fly. And in that scenario, I got some feedback of something that could have been potentially dangerous to do in the main proposal. And I'll say in my case, so I wanted to study the mechanics of these materials, but I had to make these materials. And I made that part of my, my workflow to be able to make these materials. And that ended up working maybe not so in my favor, because to some reviewers, it might have sounded like this was not necessarily a mechanics of materials proposal, because that seemed to be a big chunk of it. So I got that feedback early on. I didn't know how to interpret it or whether it was going to be that big a deal. It ended up being a big deal. So in hindsight, I should have listened more carefully to that.
I can say one thing that I was surprised by. I don't know if it's the one thing that sticks out from this process, but when I didn't get it the first year, the PO called me and he was like, oh, maybe it tells to everybody. He's like, oh, you were one proposal away. Otherwise, we'd have a very different conversation today. And I said, okay, great. And he said, what's one thing that, you can tell me that distilled from that meeting that I cannot read? And he said that you're allowed to have collaborators in that proposal, and it's okay, but they shouldn't be a co-PI. So there's a very gray area between how much of the science you have to do alone versus how much, if you're writing a typical grant, right, you might be, maybe three of us go together, we each do an aim, right? I think that level of collaboration is not okay. But I think if you're going to do something and then you need somebody else to help you interpret it or something, or do some modeling, I think that's where those support letters and whatnot can help you, and your network can help you there. And it's not something that can hurt you by having collaborators that are participating with interest in your project. You know what I mean? Different than assigning them like a full aim, but you're going to be like, I'm going to get this data, and so is going to help me with MD modeling, which is going to help us understand how this is. Okay, now we're going to go back and do some more experiments, right? So they're not central, but they're helping me interpret.
Right, and I'll add to that a bit, because I do have a senior investigator on my career award. And the reason for it for me was because I wanted to develop new capacity within my lab. And so that was placed into the narrative that I don't have this knowledge and skill set right now, but I do want to gain it. And I want to gain this as this person as a future collaborator long-term for my career. And so this will allow us to work together in a limited way that helps to expand my skill set and the skill set of those within my lab. And so it's developmental towards my career. And so that leads me to the question that Manuel asked about, what is the advice that I would give from this experience? And that is, all of this is supposed to be about your career. So, spend some time within the narrative to pull together the pieces to tell the reviewers about how these experiences, how these experiments, how these education plans, how these things all come together to develop you for leading as a researcher and educator. Like that has to be a part of the narrative, and it should all come together. You should be able to, say it at the outset and then come back to it at the end. And I think that helps to, convince folks that this is something that is necessary for you.
Yeah, I strongly agree with what Darryl's saying. One of the questions Manuel asked us to prepare was, what is the good feedback that you got? And I got a lot of sort of, well, this isn't exciting enough early on enough. Like, what is the exciting part, not the details part early on. But the other feedback that I thought was really helpful and very general is, yeah, this is about you and the arc of your career. And so I had this, the paragraph labeled career trajectory, where I talked, or a section where I talked about sort of how I'd gotten here. And then the rest of this is my plan for like establishing myself as a leader in this field. And that larger framework, I think, is not in a standard grant. The main, what was this like thing that you learned or surprise or something? To me, the surprise was how important the educational part was. So my educational proposal was very enthusiastically received the first time. And the second time was also very enthusiastically received. And the research part was like, we're not super convinced. And then it switched to like, this is interesting, but we still have questions. And so I've, at least in my case, it seemed like a strong research education proposal, really got me funded. So maybe there exists people who write stellar research proposals and have like weak educational proposals and they get funded anyways. That was not my proposal. So I do think that it just sort of highlighted to me how important, like how truly important the educational part and the integration of the education and research is in terms of what they're funding. And it's also a big part of obviously what differentiates this from a standard NSF grant.
Yeah, I guess I just looked at mine. I think I had a page and a half dedicated to my goals, what this is going to do for me, and a figure or two. So I think that's not what Darryl said is like, I think that's right, hitting the nail right on the head. And also what Maria said, I think you would never put that in a real grant, right? Ever. It would never be about your capacity building unless you were doing like an MRI or something.
I want to make sure, I think the neat things about this panel in the past and hopefully today will also be that it's specific to people's programs that they're interested in. And so I want to make sure we get that component in. Whoever wants to answer first, I'll let you answer first, but what do you think is a specific piece of advice you want to give for the program you applied for, as far as you can tell? What did you do or didn't you do or should have done or would do in the future specific to your program? And please remember to also remind people what your program was. I can also start if nobody wants to take this. One thing that I have done wrong in the past, and I think this is specific to BMMB, which is what I applied for, was that I was really stuck with this NIH kind of writing and thinking and selling. And in my first round of my career, I started out with 1.6 million people have this and that, and this is an effort to improve human health. And then sort of like, treated the science as like the necessary evil, but focused on the human health benefit. And it got really badly burned. And, I look back and I was like, I was so silly. But I would say for me, this is a specific piece of advice for folks that sort of live at the NIH, BMMB line. Move as far away from this NIH opening paragraph about how your problem is relevant to human health. I've since then heard explicitly program directors say that. In fact, Laurel has said that, and I think I don't have to keep that a secret. That's a killer. This is about basic science, and all the health benefits belong in your broader impact. It's not a problem, the broader impact, to speak about how your science and your knowledge and your tools may, down the line, provide health benefits, and it will be a good thing, but the focus should be on the science. And I think the language should reflect that. And I think that's, to me, for the BMMB community, probably the best advice.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, and I will also agree. So mine is BMMB as the primary with EBMS as a secondary program. And if you want to talk about, the split between programs, we can have that conversation. But another thing from BMMB that was within the feedback that I got was making sure that the science is around a mechanism and making sure that strongly comes out in the proposal. It was somewhat there within my proposal and enough such that folks went along with it, but it's really, really important for reviewers to see that.
Carlos, what do you think is specific if somebody was to choose moms? You kind of alluded earlier to maybe you don't want to focus too much on the materials.
Right. No, so one of the key things that got repeated to me when I was, talking to the moms program managers was that they wanted to see fundamental new mechanics, and that could mean new theory, new methods. So using standard things, I think that to them is like, oh, this is not new mechanics, because then it falls under, and I still don't know really the clear distinction, but mechanical behavior of materials is not mechanics. Really, it's that is the big distinction that I think they try to make me understand. So yeah, definitely not a big focus on making the materials or simply characterizing them in a normal way, but rather just really having a mechanics focus. That was the main thing that I think stuck to me.
So in the BMAT program, mine was a little bit different. I think they're interested in kind of the basic mechanisms of how materials work, but they're also interested in especially knowing that it's a biomaterial that you could potentially use for something. But it's this very fine line that Manuel was speaking of, where you're going to solve a problem versus knowing you requiring to know these, structure, function, or whatever principles of that material property relationships, if you want to call them that enable you to do something with it. So, maybe you're characterizing how a new material that somebody else has discovered and nobody knows how it works, and you're going to say, I think that material could be used for lots of different reasons, but we don't have any fundamental understanding. I'm going to tell you how it works. And then I'm going to show you that we can take that understanding to be able to customize it to do A, B, and C. That tends to work fairly well in the BMAT if you're not making a new materials, which I'm not somebody that's going to synthesize a polymer, well, maybe once or twice, but not for my living, but more tell you how that system works. And so that was the advice I got from the PO, was and make sure it's sort of a biomaterial. Either it's a biological material and that's coming from an organism, or that it's a material that is made out of peptides or some sort of biopolymer.
I want to make sure we pause and ask the audience for questions. There was one question about how much equipment do you have to buy with your career award for these new capabilities? Is this question directly addressed to Carlos?
Oh, it's to me. Okay.
I thought Darryl maybe.
I mean, I'll provide my opinion on that. I actually did not budget for major equipment in mine, and I don't know if I think the fellow panelists can give their opinion too. I think my thought process behind this is, if this is an investment in my career, I'd rather use this to have the right people working on this problem rather than just spending half of it on a piece of equipment. So yeah.
Right, I didn't mention capabilities specifically. So I didn't actually budget anything that was major equipment within the award, in part because it's such a limited amount. As Carlos is talking about, there's not, within engineering directorate, you just don't get large enough to be able to get large pieces of equipment. And so the arguments that I made within the proposal was that, most of the things that were necessary I already had here, and there were maybe small things here or there that I would purchase that would add onto our capabilities.
Yeah, I didn't have any major equipment for the science I was doing, but one thing I did do is I budgeted $35,000 for stuff specifically for the broader impacts. So like a decent amount of change to buy stuff for a class I wanted to develop. And I had a letter from the company that said they're going to match me, some X number of dollars. I think it was dollar for dollar to help me buy, double my money. And so I think that also kind of goes to Maria's point, where now that people know that I'm rather serious, right? Like money's been budgeted for something, at the end of the day, whether you spend on that or not is a little bit up to you, but at least in the budget that I submitted, there's, in the justification, it says this, and I'm going to do that. And I think that makes them believe that I'm kind of serious about what I want to do.
Yes, please do put resources behind any educational plan.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't have 35,000, but I definitely, and was this was mentioned. I think at the time it was the engineering career workshop, which is probably happening soon-ish, if any of you are going to that. And one of the things that they mentioned was yeah, definitely use that budget. It's to support this proposal, which includes a significant educational or outreach initiative. But I did not budget for any like major research equipment. It was like a webcam and like camcorder or something.
Any questions by the audience that we can address? Otherwise, we'll sort of go over the pre-prepared ones, but I'm sure y'all have pressing questions that we'd happily answer. If not, talking about budget, I struggled making my budget, and I was lucky that my program director was pretty hands-on, and she pretty much told me exactly what to budget. She's like, listen, this is what I see. This is what you can ask for in my program. Ask for it. And so I can share with you that in my case, she said, listen, budget for one summer month, budget for one graduate student, and a little on top, and that's pretty much it. Mine came out to be maybe 580, 590. And that was, I think, one of the first years in which the $500,000 ceiling that BMMB had was raised to technically infinite. But she clearly told me, listen, don't ask for more than 600. Is that y'all's experience?
Yeah, I budgeted similar things. Mine was, I think, 520-ish. So that's probably just a reflection of different salaries, different student costs and indirect costs.
Yeah, I think the easiest thing to do if you don't get that information from the program officer is to use the award search and look for the element code. Actually, when you meet with the PO, get the element code for that program, and they'll know exactly what you're talking about. It's a 4-digit number, or maybe, I don't know, hexadecimal, whatever. Anyway, it's 4 things in the advanced search you can put into the advanced search, and it'll pull up all the stuff that's funded by that program. And there, of course, you can quickly recognize career because it says career in the title, and you can just look at the budgets, right? And you get a ballpark right there. I mean, if everybody's asking for 300 and you're going to ask for 600, you might be in trouble.
Right. Do definitely use the award search, talk to the program officer. So my budget actually came up to near 700,000, which was extraordinarily large for the program. And it's specifically because of the amount that I put towards the education and outreach. There's a significant portion that is, it's almost 60,000 that is within that bucket. And I wanted to do that because I wanted to make sure that I was paying people associated with that portion of the work. So they're undergraduate students, they're teachers that are involved with the development of materials. And so they should be compensated for that, or I felt very strongly that they should be compensated for that. So that was part of the budget and part of the justification that I put in the budget, and also within the narrative itself. I wanted to make it clear that there were resources that were put behind these efforts.
Yeah, so somebody asked if like this number is going to get much larger because of inflation. If you're following historical trends on like career minimums or ceilings or R01 sizes, which is sort of a similar, I mean, we have numbers for a long period of time. I would not count on huge increases based on inflation.
I think the guidance that I got was exactly what Manuel was saying. The program manager, because I did struggle with that too. And I think during the summer, I was working. That's the other thing, like you'll work on the 15-page thing, but keep in mind that there's a lot of supplementary documents that also take time. So when I was doing that, I realized that, yeah, I wasn't sure what this budget should look like. But then the program manager explicitly told me, okay, summer month, a student, and then, yeah, if you need materials and supplies, then add some. But those were the minimum things that definitely came into that budget. And the one thing I also asked, I think I was very direct, is like, if it is too high, is that going to be, kill my chances? And I think the answer was clear. That it's like, no, if it's too high, then we'll have a conversation. So I don't think you should kind of go too low if you think that you honestly need more and you can justify it.
other thing about the budget is hopefully, I mean, everybody here is at an institution where somebody has won at your institution. And if you can get in touch with the grants office at your institution and find the person or people who have applied and won, maybe your department has somebody and somebody's won, and that grants person can tell you, oh, this is what that person put together. I mean, that's not like you don't want to take that for, you know, as your exact budget, but like at least gives you a framework for somebody at your institution who's won, maybe in your department, and your grants people might know a little bit about how to put that budget together in a really straightforward way to get a draft for you at least.
Any other questions? Somebody mentioned apparently somebody got close to $1 million, and I envy
They
them.
probably weren't an engineering directorate.
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, so I was just at that Biophysical Society meeting, and I met the division head of MCB, and I know her from a previous
What is MCB? Sapun?
molecular and cell biology division. And she said, so for anybody here applying, number one, the funding rates there are upwards of 25% because they went to no deadlines. So that's one thing. And she said, our funding awards are usually double what engineering were. We knew each other from engineering. So, and that's not false. If you go look at what's being awarded in that division, it's often off the scale of $750 to $1 million for just the standard grants.
That's good to know. Maybe I should reapply. That's a joke.
Your
You can't
photo,
do. I wish one could.
So we're in several different programs here, but all in the engineering directorate, with the exception of apparently Darryl's like co-sponsor, right?
I'm not engineering either.
Still within engineering, but
Okay.
BMMB is the primary program. EBMS is the
Sorry,
secondary
yeah.
program. Yeah.
I'm an MPS.
Another question that I have, sorry, Carlos, you have to sit this one out, and I think Darryl as well. So you unsuccessfully applied the first time, Maria and Sapun and I, sorry for calling you out, but I think that's an important data point for a lot, right? What was you mentioned a little bit earlier already, but what was your feedback and how did you react to it? And now reading the feedback you got from the reviewers, did you do that successfully? What is your implementation strategy? I would just like to hear your thoughts, because some of the people here may have applied one time already and maybe debating this right now.
Yeah, so I applied in the summer of 2020 and so I had mentioned I got very good, like they enjoyed reading my educational proposal, which I thought was like very strong language. I appreciated that. And the research, yeah, was like not panned or anything, but not like obviously not funded. So the two main things that I did in between, I almost didn't touch the educational part, updated the preliminary data, that's all. But I had submitted an NSF and an RON at the same time on a large, like the NSF version and the NIH version. So not, actually I think the career came first and then the RON to Manu's point earlier, but yeah, I was sort of applying this method that I thought of to like a specific disease case. And that I think just, maybe I wrote about it in an NSF-y way, but it just wasn't sort of intrinsically NSF-y. So, so I changed that, basically use the same method, but applying to different questions now. So I'm looking at brain morphology, basically, in human development and in evolution, instead of in like health and disease. So it's a much more sort of NSF feel. The other important thing there was, I was like, oh, maybe this will actually be funded, because I never think my grants will get funded. And it was not helpful it was not sort of strategic for me to have two grants that are so strongly overlapping. So when I was in a better place, had a little bit more time, was not very, very pregnant, I was able to rewrite the NSF career to be different enough that I would not run into significant problems if they were both funded. It ended up not being a problem I had, but.
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
The question was, how did you essentially react to your first?
The comments, yeah.
Yes.
So in my case, I felt like the comments were kind of similar to Maria's, where they weren't so much on my broader impacts, educational component. So similar to her, I did not really change much. It was a bit more detailed on the science, actually. I think they were thinking I was trying to do too much than too little. So I kind of blew up the science for the second round. And I mean, it was the same area. So I started, working in this kind of like, these protein droplets and biomolecular condensates. And so I had ideas there for the first area, and maybe you apply them and, do something in cells and show I could use them for delivery or something. And they were like, hey, this is kind of uncontrolled. Maybe don't do that. And so I basically took the same area, almost took the first 1.5 aims from the first version and just blew that out with more depth for the second version. And that is what ended up getting funded. So the general idea was kind of the same, but I narrowed the scope. And I think that they wanted that because of the amount of effort you need to put towards the broader impacts and the educational component, that it was maybe a little bit too ambitious for what they thought could be done on the research side as well. And secondly, that comment I made about the collaborators. So I explicitly, I said, so-and-so, I've worked with so-and-so, here's the name, right? And there's a really generic letter for NSF now. There's not like an NIH letter where you can espouse how awesome somebody is. Like if you were to ask me to collaborate, I would cut, paste, stick it on letterhead, and that would be all you can write. Like I'm not allowed to write anymore for you. So the first time I just said, oh, I work with so-and-so, and yeah, we'll work together, it's fine. But the second time I sort of said how these people would be more involved in a more specific way to answer certain questions. Again, not too devoted to the main thing, but to more the sections of the proposal that I thought they'd be useful. And apparently that was something that was lacking the first time.
One thing that hasn't really been mentioned, and I want to warn you all if you don't know this already, the NSF career also differs in that you need a letter from your department head.
Right.
And I would not underestimate the power of this letter. My reviewer specifically addressed the letter as having been a plus for my application. So I think we've all been in this situation. I think many letters we write ourselves because our chairs are very busy. If you do write a really good letter for yourself, it cannot be overemphasized. But include the letter writing process as a serious part of your proposal. It's not, I can tell you my letter was, I think, 2.5 pages long and really spoke directly to the science, spoke to the integration of my education and my science into the framework of the university and the global goals. So, you're not allowed to have letters from collaborators, but you're allowed to have a letter from a chair and they can say whatever they want. And so, use that opportunity to say good things about yourself that, you want to reemphasize or that didn't fit into your proposal. Don't underestimate that, and definitely don't forget it. One of my colleagues forgot to upload it, and your proposal will be automatically rejected.
And if you have a hard time writing a strong enough letter about yourself because it feels weird to say that, she's a pioneer in her field and she's innovating, at the cutting edge of whatever, and she's brilliant and well established and blah, blah, blah. Ask a friend. It doesn't have to be your chair, but somebody that you think really believes in you, and ask them to sort of spice up the language, emphasize, the impact more. Like there's not just the options of your chair writing everything in like a locked room and you writing everything in a locked room. It can be a reflection of many people, and that might be what it takes to get sort of the enthusiasm and the energy right.
I would echo that very much. And I think you can also maybe talk to a former advisor or someone you have a good relationship with them, and they wrote you a letter to get the job that you're in now. Most of them are willing to share that letter if you really want, right? Because the sort of process is over, but you can at least see like what a really nice recommendation letter was, because presumably that helped you get the job that you're in right now.
And I think the key is to keep in mind that people evaluate your package holistically. And some reviewers may look more at the educational component, some more at the research, but in the end, I think people want a really nice package of integration of research, education, and they want to see that you're in the right place for this as well. And every place has its own unique strengths. And so I think playing to them and integrating them in the letter can be sort of a nice way to sort of put the bow around it all and kind of bring that point home. One thing I do want to mention real quick, having previous successful applications was critical to me. I think submitting something that ended up being successful. What I did was actually I looked at all the applications, all the previous careers in BMMB through the NSF website. And then I sort of like looked for fairly recent ones. And then I looked for names that I recognized, and I emailed people and I said, hey, I'm applying for career. I would love to take a look at yours. Would you feel comfortable sharing that? And 10 out of 10 people sent me theirs. And, you know, you of course have to be honorable and keep them to yourself and you know, be discreet as much as you can. But I would definitely get other people's examples. There's nothing like taking a look at a successful application and seeing what that looked like. So don't be shy, reach out to people. People are generous. I think we're more worried about people not being generous than they end up being. What I'm trying to say is people are generous and they want to help and take advantage of that, okay? That was one of the questions that I also saw in the chat. Anything else the panel or the attendees want to ask or get off their chest, share? My last words would only be, I believe in you. And you can do this. I really believe it.
So quick final comment, sort of related to seeing sample proposals. My university does collect them and make them available to like our own faculty, but some of them are in, you know, I don't know, one was like on looking at hormones in baboons in Africa or something like that. And so there's, you know, a different program, limited things that I can get from that in some ways. But one thing that I paid attention to was like how the proposals were organized, like probably this like broad to narrow, back to broad structure, what headings were used, how was the distribution of length handled. And so I made some notes about that, like, you know, so-and-so put this much, like that's what got me to put a whole page in there about my career trajectory and what I'd done and how this was going to set up my career, because I saw that in successful proposals, whether or not they were looking at baboons or like telescopes or whatever it was. So that was very helpful for me, even if they're outside of your field.
And I had one thing that I wanted to mention. I received some questions about whether it was worth to attend this general engineering panel that I think is taking place pretty soon. And I did attend it. I will have to say a lot of it is just very generic things, but that was helpful to me, especially being so new to that program. Because I'll tell you a lot of things that are in the RFP, right? A lot of it, you know, will get explained to you. One of the things that and I'll say this as maybe as a caution for you to keep in mind, there will be a big focus in this hypothesis-driven approach, which at least in mechanics in my field, it's a little bit, it seems unnatural. And I struggle a little bit with being able to formulate it that way. So this is where maybe looking at specific successful proposals from that program will help you really see how people navigated that line, because you know it's hard to say, like in mechanics, I hypothesize that it's going to be this way. Like it's not really how I think we frame the question. So keep that in mind.
So to add a couple of things, you know, it really is important for the proposal to tell the story about how it helps your career. So it's a lot about you. And I think that can be uncomfortable because it's not something that we typically do in writing grants. So it takes some time to really think about what that is and what that means and how do you communicate that effectively. I think Maria's advice about looking at you know, structure of proposal to understand how people, you know, distributed things, that was really helpful for me. So definitely reach out to others to see some examples and see how they did it and what was effective. Make sure also to have folks that are both within your field and outside of the field look at the proposal and give you feedback on it. It was really helpful to me to have folks tell me that, you know, this sounds off within the science, or, you know, I don't understand how you uniquely can do this. Why is it you that needs to do this versus others? And that should come out in the proposal, along with some questions that they asked that I ended up just asking and answering the question within the proposal so that the reviewers could see that and could see the thinking behind why I determined why I should go in a particular direction. I think all of that is really helpful. And to echo Manuel's point, you all can do this. Like it's an intensive effort. It will be challenging, but it's worthwhile. And you have the ability, you have the support, you have a community of support to help you with being able to be successful here.
Awesome. Hey, I want to thank the panelists one more time. fantastic work, fantastic dedication of your time. I appreciate you. I appreciate the attendees, and the best of luck to all the attendees.
Yeah, good luck, everybody.
Good luck.
Yeah, good
Feel
luck,
free to reach
everyone.
out.
Thanks for organizing, Manu.
Thank you.
Yes.
Take care.